Welcome to the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity. My name is Boogie Black, and I'm coming to you from beautiful Honolulu, Hawaii. It is now about 11:30 my time, 2:30 your time. Today we're going to be learning some of the basics of what we call foreground versus background, and in particular, we're going to be working with a walk cycle or another cycle. Actually, I'm going to be introducing a flying cycle rather than a walk cycle, because we've all been seeing over the course of the week how to do a walk cycle, but it's nice to know that that same concept and that same technique can be used for any repetitive motion, such as swimming, walking, flying, running, let's say repetitively itching your nose, itching your nose, itching your nose. Anything along those lines where you want to create a repetitive motion, you only have to do the drawings once, and then what you can do is shoot those drawings over and over and over again to create a cycle. So what we're going to work on today is I'm going to be collaborating with my fantastic co-conspirator during this class. His name is Mike Funt, and you can see Mike waving right now. Mike is in Irvine, California, along with Scott, and I'm in Hawaii. And at certain points, I'm going to ask Mike to act out certain techniques that we're trying to learn, very similar to how it was last week. So Mike, you can see in his studio, has what we call a green screen behind him. When you animate or you do any sort of film effects, oftentimes you can shoot a flat color as your background, and then you can do what's called keying out that color, meaning you can identify that color, and that color will become transparent, so you can see a background behind it. Mike's going to be using his green screen today to kind of show some of the techniques that I'm going to talk about. So with that, I want to introduce you, first of all, to what I'm going to be working on regarding a cycle. A cycle is a series of drawings, usually on the order of 8 to 12 drawings, of which you can play and shoot or photographs over the course of a particular duration of time in order to create repetitive motion, as I was telling you earlier. So I'm going to show you real quick some examples of a cycle animation that is basically running over and over again the same drawings. In this case, it's actually going to be a painting. So let me show you real quick. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to go into my Instagram account. And we're going to be looking at this animation right here. So I'm going to bring it up. And notice how this is actually done with painting, but it's approximately a 8 to 12 frame different paintings that can be cycled. In other words, each picture can be shown over and over again in succession in order to create a repetitive motion like flying. So this is something that we're going to demonstrate today, although it won't be painterly like this. Okay, the other thing that you probably spent some time, I know you, several of you spent some time last week working on a walk cycle. I wanted to share with you again something that allows you to study motion in a very slow motion way. So I'm going to go back to my Instagram account. I'm going to close this out. I'm going to go down to a piece of animation. It's actually live action, but it is so nicely shot in slow motion that you can actually see the walk cycle here of this frog. Watch this frog. Look at how his hands excuse me. Notice how his hands and legs repetitively go through motion, but he has the sense of coming towards the camera because he's an actual object. But if you were to turn him on his side, in other words, film him from the side, he would only be raising and lowering his arms and legs once through the motion, and then you could repeat that motion over and over again in order to create the cycle of him running along the top of the water here. So this is another really interesting opportunity to study motion in great detail. You can study how exactly his feet land and how his arms move in opposite directions here. All right? Okay, with that, I'm going to get into our little animation exercise of the day, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to, first of all, create a storyboard. What is our story going to be today? So for that, I'm going to be using these tools. Scott, if you don't mind, if you could go to my, yep. These are my basic tools here. I've got my what's called bond paper back here in the background. This is just simply classic paper that you would get at school or is for your Xerox machine. Then I've got my series of various drawing tools here. I've got my very hard leaded pencil called a barrel 2H pencil. It has a 2 and an H on it to indicate that it's a hard pencil for light drawing. Then I've also got what we call a 2B pencil. This is your classic school pencil. It's called a Ticonderoga pencil. And its lead weight is 2B. It's soft. It's a soft, so you get a darker line. Always a good idea to have your handy eraser. I tend to use what's called a Staedtler Mars eraser with refillable erasing objects. Let me just open it up. You can see here that I've got this long eraser that I can put into this eraser holder, lock it down, and then slide this device up to lock the eraser in place. This becomes very, very handy. Would highly recommend that. Then I've got a thin Sharpie, black Sharpie. It's got a thin point. That's for drawing light lines. Then I've got a thick Sharpie for drawing darker lines. And then finally, I've got a different colored dark Sharpie because we're going to be dealing with foreground and background. I want you to be able to see the color difference between the background object and the foreground object. So the foreground object, I'm going to be coloring with black, and the background object, I'm going to be coloring with red. Okay? Finally, I've got one last tool that's always good to have. This is what's called a T-square. A T-square sits over the back of your Lightbox, which I am using right now, and it allows my ruler to move up and down the page here perfectly level. It's called your classic T-square. Sometimes you'll hear T-square and triangle, of which I don't have my triangle handy, it's over there, but it typically lies here, and then you have perfect right angle drawing capabilities. Okay? So, with a cycle, we're going to start with a storyboard. We need to know what our story is going to be. As you probably remember from last week, a storyboard can be broken into frames here. Okay? So, let me show you this. All right. So what we have here is we have a 3-frame storyboard. We're showing the start frame of what we're working on, and that's at 0 seconds. So it's the start frame of the animation. Then I'm going to move over to the last frame, and indicating in frame number 3, it's 2 seconds. So this is a 2-second long animation starting from 0 frame, going to 2 frames. And the question is, if I've got a beginning frame that looks like this and an end frame that looks like this, what is going on in the middle of the story? Now, as you can see here, we've got what appears to be a flying bird flying right by the camera, okay? But the story is told here in the middle, where the bird makes a bank. So imagine the bird is flying along like this, and then he turns and banks into frame and then goes back into motion. That's what the storyboard indicates here, okay? So what we can do is we can create a nice animation, 2-second animation, based on this storyboard. You've got a beginning frame, a middle frame, and an end frame. Now up here at the top of the drawing, you'll see a similar graph to what I had last week. I've got a vertical axis that lets me know what are the elements that are in this scene. In this case, there's going to be 3 elements: the cycle animation, the background, and then the bank. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to put the bank in. When I mean the bank, if you're flying like this, you glide, and then you start flapping your wings again, okay? But you can see that this is indicated, the other axis, the horizontal axis, is time. So these 3 elements here are all going to be on the screen at the same time for a duration of 2 seconds, okay? There's going to be the cycle animation, which is 8 drawings. So it'll cycle here, it'll cycle again, and then I'm going to bring in the breaking of the cycle, which is the bank. I'm going to play the bank for approximately, let's say, 15 frames, and then I'm going to go back into my cycle, like here. All along that time, the background is going to be moving linearly, meaning that it's just simply going to be trucking along at a constant rate. It's going to be moving across. I indicate that in my overall scene plan here as just moving in equal distances over time. Small little distances over time. So I've got the walk cycle down at the bottom. It's an 8-frame cycle. You can see it cycling each time. And then I've got the background moving linearly. And in the middle of the frame, I'm not going to show this, but what would happen is you would break the cycle. And when you break the cycle, you're going to introduce him gliding like this. And then coming back to the cycle and continuing to flap his wings, okay? So that's important. This is a storyboard, always a good idea to put your storyboard right in front of you as you do your animation so that you can see what the director of the animation wanted your scene to look like. Give me a second, I gotta find my tape. Here it is. So I'm just gonna tape up my storyboard right in front of me. So I'm taping it right onto my screen right now. So I can see my timings with my overall scene diagram, and I can see the motion by virtue of the storyboard, okay? So what I would do next is, if I happen, excuse me for a quick sec, I want to grab something. If I have animation paper, which I don't, but if I had animation paper, I would be using a registration peg that looks like this, okay? And the registration peg would be taped to the bottom of my drawing area, and the paper would be punched. In other words, there would be a hole in each of the pages, and you could set that onto the registration peg, and thereby all your drawings would be registered. I'm going to basically do my registration by taping things in place because I don't have any punched paper. Does anybody out there have punched paper? If so, go ahead and show it to the rest of the class. Okay, nobody has punched paper, but if you've been watching Naileen's class, she uses punched paper, and it's punched with a very specific type of punch because you can see here you've got a round center peg, and then you have two flat side pegs. And what that does is it keeps your paper very registered. It won't move. It'll stay perfectly registered to your previous drawings. Okay? So with that, I'm going to show you our animation. So here is the drawings that I just did. I did it right before class, and I started my drawings with very light figures, roughing in the overall form of the bird, roughing in his main joints and his main mass here, drawing a straight line through it, getting the tail roughed in, getting the body roughed in like so, coming back to his head, putting in the eye, determining the length of his beak, determining his jaw, creating his neck. Then the critical thing that I started to do after that was finding the main skeletal joints. In this case, I'm drawing this frame and I know that his wings are going to be flying forward, and they probably extend all the way down to here. So now I have a general skeletal figure, and then I can rough in the rest of the wing. And then his other wing in the background. And ultimately, as you can see, you start to rough in a figure that is first drawn in pencil and then come back over and drawn with hard line, in my case, with a Sharpie. Okay? So you got the head, got the tail, you got the wings. Key thing about the wings is you have to find the skeletal structure, meaning the joints, so that you can make sure that you're animating the larger parts and then filling in the lesser parts. Okay? And as you can see, I've numbered every one of my drawings here. Very important. I typically number all my drawings in the lower right-hand corner. Okay? So I number my drawings, and what I've done here is I've done the keyframes. And I circle the keyframes. These are the extremes of the motion. In my case, my start frame, number 1, my 4th frame, which is going to be with the wings retracted, and then finally back to my 8th frame where the wings are just starting to come back to frame 1. So here's frame 1. Here's frame 1. And here's frame 8. Okay, when I put them all together, I'm going to move 8 back to the back. I then take those keyframes, number 1, number 4, and number 8, and then I do what's called in-betweening. Between those keyframes, I do the motion that gets it from the one keyframe to the next keyframe. I'm going to show you that with numbers 1, 2, 3. I'm gonna put them at an angle here where you can see them. And 4. It's hard to see, I know, but I'm just gonna put them here and flip through them real quick so that you can kind of see what it looks like. So, frame 1, 2, 3, 4. See that? Let me go through them again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm going to animate from frame 4 to frame 8. Frame 8 looks like this. So I'm going to animate between these two frames. Frame 5, 6, and 7. So with those, you can see frame 1. Now the wings are basically starting to go flat again. Back up. And then starting to make their swoosh down again. So that was an in-between. I in-between drew between frame 8 and frame 4. So I in-between frame 4 and frame 8. Now, before I get started actually drawing, it's always, for anybody who was here for last class, always a good idea to act out your motion. So I'm going to ask Mike to go back and first of all, well, let's start with, why don't we start, Mike, with the flying. So go ahead on back to your screen. And I want you to pay attention as you're animating. It's really, really important that you spend some time in front of a mirror and actually watch the motion that you're trying to do. So Mike, give us a general flying cycle and then repeat it. Do it slowly, frame by frame. See how his elbows are coming up first. Elbows come up first, and then he comes down with his hands. His hands are actually following his elbows. So his elbows go up first, elbows up, flap down, elbows up, flap down. That's the good repetitive motion that we're looking for. Do me a favor, Mike, turn to the side and show them what it looks like from the side. Go ahead. Notice how his head bobs too. His head goes down when his wings go up. His head goes down when his wings go up. And then to accentuate the motion, his head goes up when his arms go down. So one more time, Mike.
Sure thing. And that's really important, Boogie, to think about. Pantomime and animation have a lot in common in that you want to replicate how things actually move. Whereas some people might just do a bird flapping its wings and go like this and just flap the wings.
Right.
But when a bird is trying to take off, what they're doing is they're pushing against the air to lift themselves off the ground. So when they're raising their wings, they're sinking in the air a little bit. And then when they push their wings down, they're pushing against the air, and that gives them that lift. So if you animated this sequence with just this, it might look a little flat and not look very real in your animation. But if you capture the way the bird actually pushes against the air and sinks when it's lifting its wings back up, then you can give it a more natural look in your animation.
Absolutely. And Mike, just to chime in there, remember that when we studied squash and stretch last week, the key was to exaggerate motion. And that's really a key when you're animating characters. You want to exaggerate your motion because your mind is forgiving. It says, oh, that's just normal motion. But in order to communicate the sense of normal motion, we have to exaggerate everything in drawings, okay? It's the same thing that we talked about last week with regards to, or the beginning of this week with Naleen and also Daryl. They talked a lot about the squash and stretch in walking, creating a cycle is actually how your head bobs. Your head goes up and down. It's funny, nobody, when you study motion, nobody really looks at that, thinks about it. But your head is basically bobbing up and down, and it makes the motion much more believable and convincing, and definitely makes it a lot more entertaining. You can really get stuck with very, very stiff motion if you don't add the squash and stretch that we learned last week. We're using the squash and stretch in this case, just as Mike said, he's accentuating his up, not just by bringing his arms up, but also bringing his head down and then pushing his head back up again. You're accentuating those motions, okay? So I'm going to try to quickly just show you these drawings, okay, here, just so that you can see how they work. So again, it's a frame 1 here, lower right-hand corner. It's circled because it's a keyframe, okay? And then I'm just going to quickly rifle through these so that you can see how the motion is working. Okay? Let me try that again. Okay? And then we would go back to frame 1. So you'd be back at frame number 1, creating a cycle. Okay, so you're shooting, in other words, you're photographing and shooting a cycle by virtue of photographing 1 through 8, and then going back and shooting 1 through 8 again, and 1 through 8 again, and 1 through 8 again. Okay, now I'm going to turn on my Lightbox because it's always good to see how I do this drawing. So I take number 1, frame number 1. I take number 4. Those are my 2 keyframes. And I put them down on the Lightbox. And there are the extremes of my motion. Okay? The wings are down here in frame 1, and they need to retract up to get to frame 4. So what I do is I lay down number 2, and I make them move a little bit further. Then I put down number 3, and you can see the wings moving. They're kind of in a reverse order. I've got to get number 4 up on the top now. Okay, you can generally see as I throw these down. Whoop, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now, once I've done keyframes 1 through 4, I'm going to take number 4, and I'm going to take number 8. So now we're dealing with the downward, what is going to become the downward motion of the wings. The 4 frames that I just did were the upward motion of the wings. Now I'm going to show you the downward part. Okay. So here are the 2 keyframes, and I'm going to in between them in order to create the animation. So this is the wings. starting to come down. So let me get number 8, put it on the top. And now you can again see the completing of the upward motion and then quickly the flap downward. Oh, sorry, it's still coming up. And then the flap downward here. Okay. Now, when I put all those drawings together, I'm going to have a nice cycle. Okay, because I'm just going to repeat these 8 frames over and over and over again while I do something that's kind of cool that you're learning today, which is moving a background. You have a frame of reference. So the character is going to be animating in place. The way you create motion is that you move something. In this case, a telephone pole along the background. So basically, I'm going to start telephone pole way over here. And over all of this cycling animation, I'm going to do what's called a pan. I'm going to pan this light pole across the screen in the background. Like that. So the character will be animating in the foreground, and the way that I'm going to create the sense of motion is by moving the background. Rather than moving the foreground object, I'm going to move the background object. Okay, I'm going to turn my Lightbox back on so you can see this. And I'll quickly talk you through. So here's my foreground character. Here's my background. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to animate just by doing a pan. I'm going to animate this object right underneath the characters like that. And it's going to move right along. God, I've got tape all over everything. It's a little guy. Okay, anyway, you kind of get it here. So imagine this just panning by in the background. Now the sense is that the bird is moving. That's your sense because your environment, your natural environment out in the world says that telephone poles don't fly and move. It's birds that fly and move. So although the bird is actually staying stationary, your mind tells you that actually the bird is moving and the pole is staying still. And you create that by doing a background pan like this. Now, Mike has put together a really nice example of this. And Mike, I'd like to have you explain to the class what you put together in order to demonstrate a walk cycle and a panning background.
Sure. So like Boogie was saying earlier, we can use this green screen background to kind of be able to be keyed out so that we can replace it with another background. And so that's what I did. So earlier today, I recorded a short video of the flying cycle that we just did, where I was standing still, just like I'm standing still right now. And I'm just in place flapping. And then Scott actually created a moving background that we could put that in front of. We keyed out the green screen, and so we can put the moving background behind it. And I'll show you what that looks like. I'll share my screen real quick so you can see what that looks like. So here we have this, and you can see from this video, or you can see here where this is the video with me in front of the green screen, and that green screen has been keyed out. And so now play the video. I'm gonna and go to full screen. And then when we play the video, it might be a little choppy at first, but should fix itself.
Look at that. So although Mike is staying in one place, the sense that he is moving is not done by his flying, it's done by moving the background in the opposite direction of the direction he wants to go. Very good, Mike. Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to demonstrate for you how I do this animation in terms of having a background, what we call a background pan cell. And if you can see my screen, this is a pan cell. I'm going to turn my... This is a pan cell. You'll notice that the drawing of the light post is in the middle of the drawing, and the drawing is long so that it can go from out of frame on the frame right and pan across until out of frame left, like that. Now, the way you do that when shooting is I've taken my ruler, as you can see across the top here, my ruler or my T-square, and I know that there are equal increments here across the top. These are inches and half inches. And what I've done is I put a mark in my drawing, my background cell. It's right here, this red mark. Now, if I take that red mark and I line it up with one of the inch marks on my ruler, as I make each picture with my cycle over the top, I'm going to move this over half an inch. Tape it down, photograph one of my cycle images, then lift it up, move it, 1/2 inch, take a picture, then pick it up, move it, changing out. Every time I move that pan cycle, I'm putting a new frame of animation in front of it. So watch how this works. You can probably barely see it, but I've got registration marks actually marked on my Lightbox. They're right here. And these registration marks are going to allow me to put the foreground animation right over that pole. But I'm going to start the pole all the way over here out of frame, like so. So I'm going to tape it to the top of my ruler. Then I'm going to put my first frame of animation down. I'm going to register it on those marks that I have in the background, like that. I take a picture. I change out drawing number 1 and bring in drawing number 2, and I advance the pan cell by 1/2 cell, 1/2 inch. Second drawing, picture. Remove the drawing, move the pan cell, 1/2 inch. Bring in my third drawing, register it, picture. Advance the pan cell, 1/2, like so. Slowly, as you can see, the light pole is starting to come in behind the motion of the bird. Next frame, advance, 1/2 inch. register. And you can see that once I get to frame 8, when I get to frame 8, okay, the light pole will probably have advanced to about here, and I'll start to see some overlap between my foreground and my background. I'll start to see the character overlap here. Even though the character is staying in place, it's as if the camera is tracking with the flight. The camera is actually moving with the bird, causing the background to move in the opposite direction. Okay? So, I'm going to advance. I'm at frame number 8, the last frame of my cycle. I'm going to advance the light post a little bit further, and now I'm going to go back to frame 1. And I'm now going to put down frame 1 again, because this is our cycle. I'm going to register it here. I'm going to advance the light pole a little bit further. Put down frame 2. Take a picture. Then advance it again. A little bit further. And then once again, put down frame number 3. Over that. You can see now that we've got some really nice overlap between foreground and background. So you've got the red lamppost in the background. You got the black bird in the foreground doing his fly cycle. Okay? Now, eventually, what's going to happen is this pan cell will have, by going 1/2 inch over the duration of 2 seconds, will eventually be over here exiting frame. It'll be exiting frame, and I'll probably be at some point in my cycle where it now looks like the bird has flown completely past the background lamppost. Okay? Now, what I did was I photographed this with my camera, with my cell phone. And what I'm going to show you now is what that animation looks like. So bear with me for a second. So this is a really good and easy way to check your motion, to do what we call a motion test. All of this is not final animation. The bird hasn't been colored in yet. The lamppost hasn't been also colored in. There's probably even a further background behind the lamppost, like let's say a horizon line of mountains, which most likely won't move at all. They'll just stay in the far, far background. The lamppost will be in the middle background, and then your bird will be in the foreground. And what will happen is the mountains will stay in place, the lamppost will go by, and then the bird will be doing its cycle in the foreground. Let me show you what this looks like. Yeah, I hope you can see this. So here's the beginning of my cycle. Okay. See that? Watch it again. So lamppost is out of frame. I'm doing my cycle, and I'm flying right by that lamppost. And now with this simple little technique, I can study the motion very carefully, frame by frame. And then I can bring and accelerate the motion up to speed. See that? And that what you have now is you have a cycle animation with a panning background. That's what this technique is called, a panning background that moves from one side of the frame to the other side of the frame at a constant rate. It's moving 1/2 inch per frame. And then over the top of that, I have an 8-frame cycle that I'm going to repeat over and over again, shooting all 8 frames in succession over the top of that moving background. Now, to remember, the background has to keep moving to the left, even though you're returning back to frame 1 of your foreground animation. So your foreground animation is basically going through 8 frames over and over again, but over the course of the entire animation, the light post is moving all the way from frame right all the way over to frame left. And with that, you create the sense of motion while the camera stays locked on the character. So the camera stays right on the character, and you create this sense of motion, not by moving the character forward through the frame, but rather by moving the background past the character, like that. So with that, Mike, I'm going to ask you if you want to add anything to what we've demonstrated today.
The only thing that I would add is we talked about when birds are flying, you can interrupt the cycle with a moment of like soaring or banking, and I had done one of those as well. So I'll just share that little video real quick. It's only like 40 seconds or something. So this is just after you go through a couple of those cycles. Sometimes birds, you probably have seen them in outside somewhere, but they will fly and then they kind of get going up to speed, or they catch a breeze and then they stop their wings and they just kind of glide on the breeze. And again, if your animation is kind of holding still and you let the background go by it, it still looks like the bird is moving. So this is a little version of that. So I will bring this full screen. So the bird is flapping and flapping and flapping, and then it catches a breeze or gets up to speed, and then it can just soar. And as long as the background keeps going along behind it, it still gives that impression that it's moving forward, even though your drawings would just be kind of standing still.
There you go. I really like the concept that we introduced in the storyboard. Scott, if you can bring up my down shooter again. You can see here that the story is the walk cycle. So the bird is flying here through its cycle. You can see that kind of demonstrated in the first frame and the last frame. But the story is told in the middle here. Just as Mike described it, you have a cycle where you start to see the repetitive motion flying. But then you can interrupt that by finding frame 8 of your cycle and now turning the bird like this over a unique animation of, let's say, 12 frames, and then come back down to frame 8 and go back into your cycle. So you're doing your cycle, find the bank that you're going to put in, bank the bird left, bank the bird right, come back to frame 8 of your cycle, and start flying again.
And the only other thing that I would add is something that Boogie started to point out a little while ago, and that is right now we've kept it very simple with there's just one object going back behind the object that's supposedly moving, the bird in this case, where we have just the telephone pole or just the light post going by. But what's really interesting about the way things move and about how our eyes perceive movement is that the further away something is, the slower it seems to go. So if we had the bird and then maybe we had a tree that was close, that would move faster than the light post, which would move faster than the house in the background, which would which would move faster than the mountains, which maybe don't even appear to move at all. And if you've ever been in a car, you can see this. If you look right out the window at the ground that's going by right next to you, it looks like it's going by really fast. But if you look at a tree, it appears to go by a little bit slower, and the house in the distance appears to go by even slower. So when you're creating your animations, you have the cycle of the bird going, and then the background, the different layers of background that you can have really help to enhance that motion, because the things that are closer will move by faster and the things that are further away will move by slower. So
And
that's
actually,
just,
yeah, Mike, that's a really, really good concept that I was hoping to demonstrate today. That overall concept that Mike just talked about is a process in animation called multiplane. What you have is you have planes that move back towards the horizon from the camera. And each of those planes will travel at a different rate in order to create the sense of motion with depth. So as an example, if I'm the, let's say I personally am the foreground character. Well, if there's a car moving behind me in the background, he's going to go by like this. Whoosh. Now, the house that is behind the car is going to be on a separate layer behind the car, and it's going to be moving a little bit slower. And then further back in the third part of the background will be something like, let's say, a tree way back there, and it will be moving very slowly. And then finally, in the ultimate background, sometimes you can have multiplaning of up to 5 different layers. You'll have the mountains, which will basically not move at all. And what that creates is it creates an incredibly dynamic sense of motion, because different objects on different planes behind the foreground motion are moving at different rates. The foreground ones are moving faster and the background ones are moving slower. And you have to animate each one of those layers. So the first one you may animate by very quickly, while the second one, watch my hands here. So imagine this hand is right behind me, and this hand is in the distant background. They're going to be traveling like this. Sorry, I'm trying to get in front of the camera. They're going to be going like that. So the foreground one is going to be moving very fast while the other one moves slowly. And that creates incredibly convincing dynamic motion. And it also creates depth to your scene. Your scene becomes, rather than just flat, cartoon-like, it becomes much more deep, like a 3-dimensional world. That's a technique called multiplane. Okay, guys, we're approaching the very end. Does anybody want to share some of their work?
Here's
Okay,
Kat.
we've got a hand from Kat. Kat, you go.
So this is a sort of kind of experimental animation I'm doing. Don't mind
Great.
that was me trying to get an in-between and deciding that was the best way to do it. I can undo it easily.
Excellent. Is that a turtle?
It is a turtle. So basically the idea is that I haven't finished my in-between, but basically the turtle swims and the camera is following it.
Yep.
And the camera starts getting slower and slower. Like whoever's following the turtle with it is getting tired.
Okay.
And then it stops and the turtle goes forward a little bit, and then the turtle sees the camera and swims up to it.
That is so cool. Is this a story? Have you storyboarded this?
No.
It would be a good idea. It would help you if you storyboarded. So try to do this, let's say, in a 4 to 5 frame storyboard. Tell your story in 4 to 5 frames so that we can get a sense of what you're trying to do. And you, as the animator, can get a sense of where your drawings are relative to the overall story. Is the object closer to the camera at the end of the story and further away in the beginning? Or maybe the opposite. Maybe it's very close in the beginning and very far away at the end. So if you do a storyboard, that'll help explain your story, and it'll help you also as you do your animation to make sure that you stay on the storyline. Okay?
Okay.
So that's really good. Okay, looks like we have Cindy who wants to share. Go ahead, Cindy.
Hello. I just did this really quick while you were talking.
Wow, you actually were doing the animation? This is awesome.
Okay.
Sweet. Look at that. And out of curiosity,
I had a hard time looking at your wings, so that's the
Yep.
best I could do real fast.
that's very well done. It looks really, really nice. So out of curiosity, Cindy, what program, what application are you using?
That's Flip a Clip.
Flip a Clip? Okay, that was
Yeah.
highly recommended by Daryl. So that's looking really good. Looks like, now out of curiosity, Cindy, you did your cycle, and then were you able to quickly repeat the moving lamppost in the background?
Yeah, so Flip a Clip, you can add a layer, and you can, for the lamppost, I just manually lassoed the lamppost and moved it each time.
Got it.
So I did, for the bird, I created it when there was only one layer. So for each frame, I had to erase the wing and redraw it.
I got you.
Yeah.
Very good. So your overall, the body of your bird did not change. You're only animating the wings.
Correct.
Very good.
Um,
Excellent.
And I'll show you, speaking of that, the last thing that we were working on, walk cycle that I've showed in other classes, I started out doing it all on one layer like that, which is like a sketch. And then I started to realize, okay, I need to separate the body and each limb on a separate layer, and for that exact reason. So if I work on the bird some more, I'll probably end up adding all the layers and doing all the different parts on different layers. So, but here's the walk cycle that I've been working on.
Excellent. Looks
So,
really
yeah,
good.
I did
Really,
very quickly discover the value of having all the separate layers.
Yes. And actually, it's the way it works in traditional animation. We call them cells. And, it's transparent acetate that basically shows through to the background. So if we have, let's say, the body of a character, and the only thing that's moving is his head to scratch his, or sorry, his hand to scratch his head, we won't animate the whole character and over again. We'll just keep the body in the background and just animate the arm coming up and coming back down. So that's a very conservative and very, it's a classic part of animation is don't draw things that don't move. Don't repetitively draw things that don't move.
Save yourself work.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, anybody else want to share?
Here's Tater.
Tater?
Hello, I did it digitally, so give me a sec to pull that up.
All right.
There we go. I just did a little loop of my character ice dancing. That's all I got.
That's fantastic. I love it. That's really, really good. Awesome. Awesome.
Thank you.
Fantastic. It looks great. Have you done a cycle yet besides the, like something that involves motion? Motion.
Yeah, I've done. I also have a running cycle that I'd have to pull up.
Excellent. Good for you. Good for you. How about anybody else who wants to share?
Here's Amelia.
Okay, Camelia. Oh, sorry, Amelia. Excuse me.
It
Don't
doesn't
worry.
matter.
We love it.
Here's, I think, two, because here's one I did while you were talking. I don't know if you can see.
Yes, I can. It's a little choppy. There we go.
Oh, yeah.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Excellent.
And
Very,
also,
very good. I like also.
I have another cycle here, but I don't know.
I can, yeah, it's kind of a little bit slow, but I see what you've got. Nice squash and stretch going on there. That's fantastic. And I see you adding layers of clothing and things. Really nice to see, Amelia, that you're animating the primitive rough shapes first, and then you're adding the detail as you move on and you study your motion. That's good.
Thanks.
Excellent. Okay, anybody else? All right, if not, I just wanted to remind you guys, as I've said before, we are a free service, and we really enjoy teaching these classes and having you guys as students. So if you'd like to make a little donation to the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity, please go to chuckjonescenter.org, chuckjonescenter.org, and those contributions help us get the equipment and get everything that we need to continue to teach these classes. So we really, really appreciate that. All right, guys, we'll see you next week, and have fun and continue to animate.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Boogie.
You bet.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Take care, you guys. See you later.
Thank you.